Picture a nation fueled by boundless ambition, where pioneers forged paths into the unknown, driven by the fervent belief that expansion was not just a goal, but destiny. And this picture by John Gass represents just that, American progress, and the angel of Christianity spreading knowledge, wisdom, and order throughout the West.
My name is Sebastian Vargas.
My name is Jignesh Gupta.
My name is Micaela Dominguez.
And my name is Daniela Hernandez.
Our research question was, to what extent was the doctrine of manifest destiny of the 19th century justified with its impact on the cultural development of the residents of the North American continent? And our answer to this was that manifest destiny, driven by religious ideology, initially established a powerful national economy. However, in the long term, it left a significant legacy of environmental degradation and cultural suppression.
Now, there were two major pull factors for manifest destiny. The first being religious ideology, and the second being the financial desire to acquire wealth, land, and prosperity. This picture by the Smithsonian Magazine showcases conquistadors making contact with indigenous people of the Americas circa 1500 AD. This demonstrates how white settlers have always felt a sense of superiority to the natives of the Americas, well before the time period of manifest destiny in the 19th century. Proselytization was a major goal for the Americans. They felt that their culture alone was superior, and they used the gospel as their justification. According to Matthew Beigel, this picture by John Chapman, if it has any subtext, it is that white religion, namely Christianity, represents civilization, and that natives only become acceptable by converting to Christianity and assimilating to white customs, cultures, and traditions. Aside from religion, of course, there was another major reason for Americans wanting to traverse to the West, and that is the search of land and fortune. According to the New York Times, Henry Jenkins, a farmer from Indiana, traversed to California in search for the modest amount of gold that he could find. He, quote, endured hellish conditions to be able to find that gold. This picture here showcases those hellish conditions. Miners would be worked to exhaustion, they would face illness, and they would face starvation as well.
Moving on to resolutions, manifest destiny brought two main short benefits. The first one being the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad helped establish a national infrastructure of cheap transport of goods and people, and this eventually led to settlers migrating to the West, expand the agriculture and population of the United States. On the historical map from Alexander Durand from the Department of Economics of Northwestern University, you can see the first two stages of the first Transcontinental Railroad. Here on the east, the first stage was constructed following the Nevada Gold Rush, and the second stage was constructed from Nevada to Nebraska. The significance of this is that now farms in the West were able to send their fresh produce back to the east, and the eastern factories were able to send their manufactured goods back to the west. Another work by Durand from the Journal of Economic History, he provides two charts of expected profits from transportation entrepreneurs. As you can see here, they made massive profits, which are worth millions nowadays, showing that it was a lucrative business, and to the benefit of the settlers, they had a relatively cheap form of transport, which was also safer compared to wagons, since they were protected from wild animals and disease. Expanding on Durand's argument, William Vandenbroek from the International Economic Review provides us with these two demographic graphs of the United States. As you can see here, the Western U.S. dominated American agriculture throughout the 19th century, and you can see here the Western population overtook the Eastern population by the 1970s, which was the end of manifest destiny.
Manifest destiny had many long-term consequences, one of them being environmental harm. Excess farming during the manifest destiny caused animal extinction, soil depletion, and air pollution. When the settlers were first started to occupy the land, they realized they needed to help the Native Americans evacuate quicker. So they decided to start eliminating their main resource, which was the bison. In an interview made by Brown's University, Carl Jacobi talked about how the extinction of the bison was directly linked to the overhunting of such species. Another reason why the settlers would kill the bison was because they wanted to prevent it from mating and grazing near their cattle, since they thought that if they did any of this, their cattle would be permanently contaminated and will need to be killed as well. After they had settled in the land, they started farming it in order to satisfy their agriculture-based economy. and they started using heavy machinery like the iron plow depicted in this picture, which caused soil compaction and weakened the soil, which eventually led to the natural land called the Dust Bowl. This was basically this weakened land being eroded away by high amounts of winds in the direction of the settlers. Historian Sarah Richardson talked about how the settlers lived with the dust and watched it tear them away from possessions and the hope of possessions, meaning that these strong storms were so constant that they eventually destroyed the settlers' houses and their fields, leaving them with basically nothing.
Adding on to what Daniela just said, the second long-term implication was native culture harm. Boarding schools during the Western expansion impacted the Western Native Americans' culture. In this picture, you can see the physical consequences that boarding schools had, but boarding schools also forbidden the children to speak their native language, and because of this, according to Bustamante, much of the language has been lost, and the tribes are struggling to maintain what still exists of it. Then they also try to Christianize them, meaning that they force this religion upon them and forbid them to practice their own. And as I said, this was because it was to destroy what still exists of the Indian culture and make them civilized. And they also cause an intergenerational knowledge disruption, meaning that, and because they wanted to kill the Indian in them in order to save the men. To conclude, Manifest Destiny, moved by religious belief, initially laid a foundation for a strong national economy, yet it ultimately left a long-term legacy of substantial environmental harm and the elimination of diverse cultures. This is our citations.
All right, Janesh, we'll start with you. Realizing that you have a group of 4 people, if you had had a 5th person, what perspective could they bring in that would have added to the overall project?
If we had a 5th person, I believe a religious perspective would be very beneficial because obviously we discussed the sort of religious harm that was caused by the Manifest Destiny and how Christianity was sort of proselytized to them. But if we had a religious perspective for the natives, it would sort of provide a contrast to how diverse their culture actually was, as opposed to what Manifest Destiny paints them to be.
All right, thank you. Danny, describe an argument from someone's IRR that makes you think differently about the conclusion that you guys came up with.
I will also say Jignesh because at the beginning he talked about the religious beliefs as well. And at the beginning we didn't think it had much to do with religion, but after reading his IRR we knew that we needed to include it.
Okay, thank you. Next up, reflecting on everyone's work, which one had the best understanding for you to explain Manifest Destiny?
I feel like also Jignesh because he explained the religious part, which is the also pull factors that made everything happen.
Thank you. All right, and save the best for last. If there was there anything from anyone's IR that you didn't use, and then why didn't you use it?
On Jignesh's IR, he was going to argue about the American-Mexican War, which was very significant since it shaped like the Western expansion of the United States. And we decided not to include it since it was like slightly out for focus. Since on the short term we wanted to focus on the economy, and on the long term we wanted to focus on like the lasting environmental and cultural harm, not really like the conflicts that happened during the early Manifest Destiny.